What is up, sports fans? Welcome into the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard show. No Ryan Buckley this week. Schultze sitting in with you along with the very, very well-traveled offensive lineman Will Ortner to break us all into some Oregon, I would say some good feelings, break it down like for some crazy, like good and bad feelings. It was kind of a tale of two games for this 37-34 Boise State Broncos win. It was, I would say, thrilling in some aspects. Oregon fans, you can exhale now. It definitely came down to the wire, but the Ducks, thankfully, barely found a way to pull off that heart-pounding 37-34 victory over a very good, resilient Boise State team. Let's set the scene, of course, at the end. If you missed it, Atticus Sappington, the weight of the game on his shoulders, will calmly knocking down a 25-yard field goal as time expires to give Oregon the win. That makes 34 straight non-conference home victories for the Ducks, the longest active streak in the country, but we can't kid ourselves. This is why we're here to break this all down. Want to hear from you. There's a lot of people that are going to be driving up from the game still. Hit us up on the Vancouver Ford text line. I'd love to hear what your reactions to this very weird game were. 503-864-6FAN. This was not an easy win for the Oregon Ducks. Will, what were your initial takeaways? What were you happy about? And what scared you after, I would say, thankfully a win's a win, and you always got to celebrate a win. But another, I'd say, scary game for the Oregon Ducks.
I'd say, first off, you got to be excited about that defense. I really do think that you went against probably the best running back in the country right now, and it feels weird saying that holding him to 192 yards rushing is a victory, but aside from him just making people miss and running through tackles, in the fact of he's getting stopped at the line of scrimmage in Genty, and then he's jumping outside, and the ends weren't holding the edge. That's where all of his yardage came from, or it came from him running through two or three tackles that no other running back in the country is going to run through. Now, that being said, obviously, Coach Lapoy and Coach Lanning, they're going to have those guys in, going to visit the doctor, making some changes. Some people are going to have, a tough meeting or two in that defensive room. But I do feel like when I watched that defense today, you guys kept them in the game. The defense kept the offense in. And then offensively, hey, the explosive plays were found. I'm worried about what's going on in the passing game, though, when it comes between the offensive line and your quarterback. And it's an issue of your quarterback not trusting your offensive line. It's an issue of your offensive line not giving him any reason to trust you. And then it's also an issue of not understanding where the pressure is coming from, especially early. And I know we're going to dive into more of that as we get going, but that's worrisome. When I look at the good and the bad here, it's your quarterback needs to get some stuff figured out, and your offensive line needs to get some stuff figured out. So don't be shocked if you hear, hey, the offensive line and Dillon Gabriel were all rolling around in his minivan this week trying to figure out what some of their issues are, because right now that's the biggest thing that's plaguing this team.
To address what you first said, and we're absolutely going to get into Dillon Gabriel and the offensive line. Also, the entire team really coming out pretty flat in the first few minutes of the game, and that makes me question, are we going to have another season just like last year where we're wondering if the Oregon Ducks, who are talented at every position, 4 or 5-star guys starting everywhere on the offense and defense, are we going to have to worry about them being unable to play a complete 60-minute game or get started slow, in the first part of the game or in the first part of the second half? But to address your first point, Ashton Jeanty, stud. I'm not sure that I'm mad at the defense giving up so many yards on him. It's just what it is. I believe Dan Lanning called Jeanty the best running back talent that he's seen since he's been at Oregon. He's going to be an NFL running back. I'm pretty sure he was at the top of the Heisman Trophy candidacy talk at the beginning of the season. You put him in with Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, and those two running backs are like the best in the country right now. And Jeanty showed it. 192 yards, 3 tutties, that 8-yard score that put Boise State up 34-27 in the fourth quarter. And Will, at that point, we were talking about this before the postgame show started. At that point, it was a 79% win probability for Boise State. That was about 10 minutes to go in the fourth. And you kind of wondered, oh my God, this entire time I haven't really been scared that Oregon's going to lose this game. But at that point in the fourth quarter, you kind of wonder, okay, no, these serious thoughts of not only dealing, with this really great running back, but then watching Oregon's fledgling offense, or at least the offensive line, and then, letting sacks happen on Dylan Gabriel. We can talk about getting into that as well. But Boise State was not going down without a fight, but there were so many things lacking for Oregon's team. So I don't want to get into the deep conversations that we had last season about it could be a team with really talented players that starts really slowly. I don't think that's a good team. I do think that is usually a bad team. But what I see, at least at this point, Will, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it's discipline issues. It's obviously not a talent issue, or if it's just an execution issue, which kind of goes into a discipline issue maybe. But it's just odd to me, and we're going to get into some of the stats here. Just my initial takeaways, that it's odd to me that now the first 2 weeks of the season for Oregon against teams that they should be slamming by 30 to 40 points, basically slipping by them. And it makes me worried that Oregon's going to drop another couple spots in the AP top 25.
I'm going to pump the brakes on slamming Boise State by 30. You shouldn't have slammed this Boise State team by 30.
Okay.
There's a reason why they're one of the favorites to be that group of five to make it into the playoff.
That's
now, that
fair.
being said, if this Oregon team is supposed to play up to the potential, or, if it's on paper, this is the paper matchup that a lot of people like to go into, yeah, you should probably beat them by multiple scores, especially when you're at home. That being said, I really think right now on that offensive line, you're going through and you're finally seeing for the first time in a couple of years what it's like to not have a center like Alex Forsythe, or to not have a Jackson Powers Johnson there at that center position. You are spoiled for multiple years, right, with these great centers. And I'm not saying that the center that you've got going right now isn't a great center, right?
But when you have Laulu,
and he hasn't been playing, he wasn't playing center that entire game, right? There were parts where he was out at right guard, and you saw some struggles there. So they're continuing to shuffle that offensive line group around. They've had some injuries in that room during camp.
Yeah.
So they're not able to go with the starting offensive line that they wanted. And the problem with offensive line play is it's really 5 different positions. But a lot of people will look at it and go, well, that's just one position. If you can play guard, you can play tackle. And it's completely different from playing guard on the right side to playing tackle on the right side to playing guard on the left side to playing tackle on the left side. Now, the techniques for the most part are still the same. But when it comes to what type of defensive end am I going against? What type of rush? What type of blitz might the other team try and bring against me? And then, honestly, you're doing it backwards. If I'm a left-sided offensive lineman and that's the side that I play, and now I moved over to the right side, everything is backwards for me. And it's going to take a second to adjust to that. So when you're continuing to adjust and you continue to have different centers, they're calling the game differently, they're IDing the mic differently, you're working with a different person when it comes to your double teams, to your triple teams. If you're running a zone play, all 5 guys have to be working in unison as one, and you have to be able to make adjustments without talking to each other. So you have to see the game the exact same way. And so when you're continuing to move different players around into different positions, and it's changing each week, each drive, each series, those are going to be issues that you have that you don't realize that you have. Now, that being said, at the end of the game, you move Poncho over to center, right? And you get more of a crew that it felt like they were working in unison in the second half. That's where you saw a stark difference in the run game. That's where Jordan James, a lot of his runs that were going for 3 and 4 earlier in the game, now all of a sudden you're seeing offensive linemen get onto linebackers, and those 3 or 4 yard runs are now turning into 7, 8, 9 yard runs. I mean, shoot, it feels like we're going back to it, but it's the second week in a row where I feel like Jordan James left some yards out on the table just by getting shoelace tackled at the last minute. It's going to take time. It's very clear to me right now, Dylan Gabriel, with the continued movement in the offensive line and not knowing who's going to be his center series after series, or who's going to be his guard, or really who's going to be this 5 O-line guy unit, he's not comfortable. That being completely said, this isn't all on the offensive line, and a lot of people are going to want to blame the O-line. Dylan Gabriel has a lot of issues right now when it comes to IDing a blitz, or just getting the ball out of his hands to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
The very first sack that he had, your 5 offensive linemen cut. Now, to be fair, Connerly whiffed. It was a bad cut from an offensive lineman.
Looked like he let him right by.
Right. That ball, if they're all 5 cutting, should still be out of your hands in 1 second. You don't have a second progression there. You either throw to your slant or your bubble or whatever route that you have that you are supposed to throw that ball to right then, or you better run it or you better throw it away because you're going to get hit.
It's your quick option.
Gabriel almost went back to the left side like he had another route that he could throw to there. There just isn't enough time when offensive linemen are cutting. Then, when it comes to his second and third sack, both times Boise State brought in extra guy. You had 5 men protecting the first time, you had 6 guys protecting the second time. And if Boise State is going to bring a 7th rusher when you have 6, 1 guy is coming free and you need to get rid of the ball. Ideally, you get rid of the ball where the blitzer is coming from. And it felt like in those spots, not only did Gabriel not know where the blitz was coming from, he didn't realize that there was going to be an extra defender rushing him and he needed to get the ball out of his hands quickly. So while the offensive line has a lot of things that they need to shore up, and it feels like you have your 5 offensive line group now, you finally have your 5, and this is the 5 that you should go with the rest of the way, there are some cleaning up that they have to do in that quarterback room.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit more with you when we get into our offensive discussion, Will, specifically about kind of moving guys around the offensive line and how that is conducive or not conducive to, getting right and working with guys. Because, 3 of these guys, I know that we saw some bad penalties from Cornelius last week lining up basically off sides, but Johnny, Marcus Harper, Josh Connerly, they've all been here. I would say Poncho Laulu also is a guy that you can consider, a veteran. He played a lot of snaps last season. So essentially you've got 4 guys, and then you're hoping to get Matthew Bedford back as soon as you can. But obviously having to throw Pickard in, and then instead of him, you mentioned the offensive line looking a little bit better at times. They threw Nishad Strother in, and I believe that was allowing Poncho to move back over to center. So you could see Oregon playing with some different offensive line combinations tonight. I do think they did find one that works. So we'll dive into that and figure out if that's what Oregon's going to have to do going forward. Hopefully they can get Bedford back soon. But you mentioned, of course, Dillon Gabriel, not too shabby, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, but a very rough night. You're right, a very rough night behind that offensive line. Sacked 4 times in the first half alone, I think 5 total. And, of course, just like in the fourth quarter when Oregon was trailing to Boise State, they trailed to Boise State at halftime 20-14. Thankfully, special teams came through for Oregon, and